Thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up. And thanks for all the technicians. I'm sort of an anachronism. I don't really fit into this new world. I like to write books, though. My friends kept saying to me, when's the Woodchuck going to return to gardening? Because I had written my first book called The Woodchuck's Guide to Gardening back in 2000. And the woodchuck, by the way, does not refer to the animals. I think you probably already caught that. Even though I do mention them in the book. But my friends, like I said to me, when's the woodchuck going to return? And I said, well, if I ever finish that book, I'm going to call it that. It's a great title. In fact, these two books are like sister companions to each other. One sort of follows the next. What's different about this book, The Woodchuck Returns to Gardening, which I'm going to be talking about this evening, is that I kept a garden journal for 2012 and 2013, and I just started playing around with it. I wasn't sure I was going to write another book, but then I kept writing. Well, that's what I do. I write. And I do commentaries on Vermont Public Radio. In fact, I just did one on Monday on bird-friendly maple groves. How's anybody here? It's okay. You did hear. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I've been doing many talks on VPR. And like I said, what's different about this book is that I had a garden journal for 2 years, 2012. In 2013, I want to show you the difference in the years because things are changing so rapidly now. You never know what's going to happen anymore. Everything's sort of extreme. You don't know what to expect. So I also went into fruits and berries in this book. I also included a lot about vegetables. So just to go back, I had two parts to the book. I had the garden journal, 2012, 2013, and then I went into fruits and berries and vegetables in more depth, A to Z. Just like my first book, I include a lot of stories. I have a lot of characters in the book. There's poems, some that I wrote, some that other people wrote. Friends of mine did paintings. It's a community effort when I write a book. So why don't we begin, and if you have questions, please ask them. I'd much prefer to have a conversation than just to get up here and start spouting lots of stuff. The Woodchuck's Guide to Gardening, again, this is an organic gardening book, just like my first one, and I've been involved. I started working on a farm after I got out of the service, 1969. Hill and Dale Farm down in Putney. And it was an organic farm. We raised beef and apples and vegetables. And before that time, my first garden was in eastern Kentucky, and it was in a coal mining region, and I was working in a one-room schoolhouse, and Crit and Mally Gamble came up to my house, and Crit had the mule, and Mally had the apron full of seeds. So I've been gardening quite a long time. Okay, let's move on. Vern Grubinger, who's the fruit and berry specialist for UVM Extension, did the foreword to the book. Next. Now, I have a lot of trick questions, and here's one of the trick questions I'm going to ask you. Anybody know who this is? No? Everybody always says it.
Because it doesn't have
I've
birds.
never heard.
St. Francis is birds.
Nobody's ever gotten this right. This is your chance.
Johnny Appleseed?
No. He's later on. This is Saint Fiacre, who's the venerated garden saint. And he grew up in Ireland, and he moved to France, and that's where he really took off.
So how do you spell that?
Fiacre.
Okay.
Fiacre. And you know, there's a spade right there. The before I go into my next character, now and then I read from the book. I just wanted to read to you the preface to the book. In the fall of 2000, I published my first book, The Woodchuck's Guide to Gardening. Now, some 14 years later, I want to present its companion, The Woodchuck Returns to Gardening. Along with pen in hand, I continue to dig with my hands in the soil as this keeps me honest. And I'm been a member of the Tommy Thompson Community Garden in the Intervale. It's 3 acres of community gardens I've been organizing and coordinating down there for about 25 years. So I still keep my hands in the soil. Can we go to the next one, please? Anybody have an idea who this is? This guy is called the Chuckster. This guy loves to make fun of me on the garden path. And he always says things like, I don't want to say anything. He's always saying that. But why do you love to make life so hard on yourself by starting all your vegetable plants from seeds? Why couldn't you just head over to a big box store and pick up a 6-pack? And I always have a response. I have always, I was a commercial grower for 10 years, and I love growing all my plants from seeds. I go from seed to seed, and for example, with tomato seeds, I'm transplanting them now from a flat into smaller pots, and then I put them in the garden. In fact, I've been saving tomato seeds for close to 20 years. One of the women down in the Intervale, Aika Sarkosova, she's no longer with us, but she was from the Ukraine, and she brought tomato seeds. And she gave me some, and I've been growing them ever since. It's an heirloom, open pollinated seed, delicious fruit. And so I loved, and in the fall I save seeds. I make tomatoes, I can them. So I go from seed to seed. And that's usually my response to the Chuckster. Hey, this is the way I do it. Okay, can we go to the next one? In the book, I have a lot of sketches, and a young woman, Isabel Sherman, did a lot of the sketches in the book. She's 21 years old. She had never done anything like this before, and she did a lovely job. So, and I should say that there's a lot of art in this book, more than the first book. There's a lot of there's poetry, like I said. There are even some songs in the book. Cold frames. How many of you have a cold frame? Do you have a top to it, cover?
Yep.
What do you like about it?
Well, you can start things early, and it also, it's a self-contained atmosphere for the plant.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. I open it up in the day, and at night close it. Or if it's a cold day, keep it closed.
Yeah. Right in the front of my house, I have a cold frame. I call it a woodchuck's greenhouse because I don't have a greenhouse, but I can do so much in that cold frame. And if it gets cold and windy, I put down the tops, or the official term is lights, but in fact, if you go down around Greenfield, Massachusetts, the old tobacco farms, I used to pick up those, not the frames, but the lights. They were glass, and they were really well made, and that's how they started a lot of their their tobacco plants. Anyway, and usually by early May, I'm eating greens. It won't happen this year. And I mix up the greens from the cold frame, the spinach and the radishes and the lettuce, mesclun, and I'll mix it with wild greens, dandelions, violets. You can eat the whole violet, the leaf and the flower. It's delicious. But this year is a little different. Okay, let's go on to peas. How many of you grow peas and what time? you grow the snow peas,
Little marbles.
little marble. But that's not a snow pea.
It's not a snow pea, no.
No,
It's a regular pea.
that's a regular English pea. There's different names for it. Shell peas. They take a lot more work, but there's nothing
No.
like that taste. And they really haven't had the snap peas around that long. I mean, they're relatively new. The other pea that I grow is, besides both of those, is the flowering sweet pea. Anyone grow those? I thought
Once, yeah, I don't have a garden now. I
you
have-
don't, but
yes.
you did.
Some of
Yes.
us tried it.
They're nice, they're hard. to
Initially had
germinate,
good luck.
yeah.
They are, but there's nothing like it. At the turn of the century, if you gave a bouquet of flowers to someone, they would marry you right away. Yep.
Whatever.
Is that? They're harder to grow than the English peas or the other peas, but there's nothing, what you have to do is you have to start them early. You start them as early as you can.
Can you start them now?
Oh, I've started mine a week and a half ago.
Okay.
And you gotta keep the soil wet.
It is
And-
wet.
Huh? Plenty wet. Well, I should say moist. I don't mean, are you in a floodplain or just?
Are
And,
they one of the ones you have to nick or not? I can't, no.
yeah, I put them up,
Okay.
yeah, they have to have a place to grow. And the challenge with flowering sweet peas is that if it rains, it just takes the flowers. So the ideal thing is, as soon as the flowers come off, come up and they're about that high, you cut them. And that's when you get, and then they keep coming, but you gotta cut them. You can't just look at them, because if you don't cut them, they won't keep coming. Let me just read something. I'm going to read now and then from my garden journal. This is an old English rhyme. One for the rook, one for the crow, one to die and one to grow. Plant your seeds in a row, one for the pheasant, one for the crow, one to eat and one to grow. I have a lot of these in my book. And now I'm just going to read a little bit from 2012, April 2012. That's when we had warmer early weather. April 10th, the peas in my community garden popped up through the soil. Now you have to remember, I'm in zone 5, it's warm. But you're pretty warm down here too.
3.5.
Yeah.
What?
We're 3.5.
Depends on what side of the house.
Which side of the river you're on?
Yes. Yeah.
Ohio.
Seriously.
How high? Yeah. You
Right.
sure you're not up to 4 now?
You might mention where the Intervale is, because some of these folks haven't.
Thank
gone
you.
there.
Intervale's down in Burlington. It's about 350 acres along the Winooski River, close to where Ethan Allen Homestead is. And there are 8 organic farms, and there's the community gardens down there, Gardener's Supply, the wood burning plant. So it's quite an interesting area. April 2012. Peas in my community garden popped up through the soil, the earliest I've ever seen. I transplanted some of the young green plants, lettuce, chard, kale that I started from seed in the cold frame in front of my home into my community garden plot. Planted more snow peas and flowering sweet peas along with potatoes. I also have been raising all my own potatoes for years. And I'll probably this weekend plant potatoes. Why don't we keep going? Here's another sketch that Isabel did.
Well, the other thing about Burlington is you didn't have the kind of snow we had. I've been up to Burlington several times and you hardly have any snow there. And here we've had mounds of it
Yeah,
like Boston.
You had more snow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so our ground is still wet and cold,
Mm-hmm.
so we couldn't do a lot of things.
Now, one thing I did, a little trick with my cold frame, is that I covered with a large piece of plastic.
Plastic, yeah,
and that warm, no, white,
Just white plastic?
clear plastic, to let the sun
Yeah, yeah.
bake, yeah.
I thought you meant before you planted, just to heat the ground or heat
No,
the
I
soil.
used, and that warmed up the soil that I could dig in there and
Yeah.
start planting the seeds. And then I put the seeds in and put the covers on. So I do live in a rather warm area, I admit.
It is.
I have crocuses before anyone, but the crocuses are right next to my house. So that's where the snow melts first.
Mhm.
And so I can always brag about my crocuses. I should have brought you some. Okay, just a minute. I have to go back and look now and then. Okay, this was from my garden journal. This was 2013. It was 90 degrees Fahrenheit at the end of May. Strange weather, either too dry and hot or too wet. In the beginning of May, I had to water the garden. But from the middle to the end of May, it rained and rained and rained. It ended up being the rainiest month on record in Burlington. All in all, my garden is 2 weeks behind where it should be. We'll see what happens. Okay, next please. Next. I need to have a volunteer. I don't know if anyone wants to do this. There's a poem by a woman who lives up in Facein, Ann Day. She's a wonderful poet. And I just need to have, think we could get Nadine to do that? And it's called,
Not all 2-year-olds, so it's.
yes, it's called My Garden Verses Verses. First verses is V-E-R-S-U-S. The second,
Yes.
thanks, Nadine. This is July.
My garden verses verses. Picking, cutting, freezing beans instead of verse of summer scenes. Dusting, spraying of broccoli in place of rhyming 1, 2, 3. Squash is ripening every hour. Haven't had time to pick a flower. Instead of poems, I'm shelling peas. No chance to write of wind and trees. While tying up my tomato plants through my head a sonnet chants. Up and down the aisles of corn, then husk all night till early morn. Hoe each row, pull all the weeds, such tall plants from tiny seeds. Now I'll put this all together to fill our larder for winter weather, and make a poem for all to share, as verse is food in a poet's lair.
Thank you. Ann, I've known her for years. She's a wonderful poet. And I have 3 or 4 in the book about her. This is my famous dog, Autumn Girl. She would always come down to the garden with me. And she passed a couple years ago. She's an old chocolate. And she's still with me every day. You know what I mean. Garlic. Oh, I meant to bring the garlic. I have some garlic that I weaved a number of years ago. And it's about 10 years old, but it's very dry, but I'm sure some of you have done that. How many of you raise garlic? Do you know what kind? Do you do the soft head or the hard neck?
You have a hard neck, I think.
Hard neck,
My
that's-
daughter and husband do that.
Yeah. Do you know what kinds?
Well, they tried different kinds.
Yeah.
I can't remember. She tried a variety and some worked better than others, and then they also tried the elephant garlic, which actually did really well.
Yeah, I don't care for the elephant because I don't think it has the taste.
Yeah.
It's not tight. And I like a really strong.
Last year the garlic did really poorly.
Your elephant garlic?
No, I have regular hard neck, but it was terrible. Yeah, it was like,
Tiny?
yes, very bad. But this year my garlic's up that high, so who knows?
So you follow one of the
I
wood.
moved where it was.
Oh, okay. No, one of the Woodchuck principles is it depends, and you can use it. I don't mind if you use it. But I grow Russian red, Rochambeau, And I don't care, I like the hard neck. You can tell the difference. Do you used to grow?
I've tried, yeah, the elephant and the other, the elephant just doesn't have the bite that the.
No, I like the
Yeah.
strong stuff. But again, it all depends on your soil. And when you put it in the fall,
Mhm.
and I cover it. Mine still isn't up.
Oh, no, mine's-
Yours is,
Yeah.
see, there you
Yeah.
go.
But I have raised beds, which
Yeah.
form early,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and last year was not in a raised bed.
Now, on your raised bed, do you have those, does it look like a cemetery plot with the boards around it? Or?
Yeah, I have
Oh.
timbers,
Hmm?
timbers,
You have timber.
10 to 12 inch
Yeah.
deep timbers.
Now, you could make a cold frame. If you put covers over
It
it,
would grow faster,
huh?
and it would grow fast. What if I just cover it with plastic, will it?
No, what I mean is you could create a cold frame and start plants in there.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the cold frame is you gotta make sure if it gets hot, you lift off the
Right.
top. And so I just have sticks. How does your,
Well, right now, I'm just taking, I have an old storm window,
yeah,
and I just take it off.
yeah. The only thing about storm windows, and I've used them for years, is that you gotta make sure they don't have any lead paint. So you can buy a little thing at the hardware store that'll tell you if there's any lead paint. I'm not, you know.
No, this one's a metal one. It's an old shower door.
Yeah, it's shower doors, yeah. I scrounge everything,
Yeah, right.
the planks, so it's, okay, let's move on from the garlic. Of course, we know what's going on today. Next slide, please. In fact, I'm working on a new book. It'll be in a trilogy. The Woodchuck Returns to Gardening Part 2, Landscape Plants and Ornamentals. And I'm going to go a lot into global warming and how it's affecting native plants and native insects, butterflies and bees. But it's here. We don't live in California, though, or the Southwest. Now, I just want to show you this. Burr Morris up at gave me this, and you know it's an old photo by anything interesting about the kid's diaper?
Rubber plastic cans.
And do you know what they're digging? Anybody have an idea?
Strawberries?
Now they're growing turnips, they're digging turnips. Now my favorite turnip is the gill feather. You've grown them?
No, I haven't.
Well, try them,
I
they're,
go to the festival though.
huh?
I wanna go to the festival.
Oh, down in, was it down in Dummerston or
No, it's-
Brattleboro or
It's, yeah, Marlboro, it's,
Marlboro? Yeah,
it's near.
Wardsboro.
No, it's down on the border there.
Oh, okay, because Wardsboro is where it came from. That's-
Wardsboro, yeah.
Wardsboro is where it came from, and it's not actually a turnip though. It's more like a rutabaga, but I think it's somewhere in between. It's like a sweeter turnip, but it's great. You can grow them and you can get them, and they're easy to grow. So I'd like somebody to try. I want you to try some. Do you like turnips?
Well, I don't know if I like that one, but.
Well, I can assure you, you're gonna, this one's, do you like strong turnips, or do you,
Yes, he does.
he does? Okay. All right. Well, if he doesn't grow it, then you can. Anyway, I wanted to give you the names. This little guy, his name is Ernest Gould, this little kid right here. And the old guy's name is Peter Shadow. And I got this from Burr Morris Farms up in East Montpelier. Anybody ever been up there? It's a nice place. And he gave me this photo. I gathered photos from everyone. People just gave me tons of photos to use. Next one, please. Okay. I know you grow beans. Question is, what kinds and what do you do with them? Do you, anybody make dilly beans? It's one of the easiest things there is to make. Anybody grow the pole beans? That's my favorite bean.
We used to do
I like to shell beans, you know, I like to eat them before they go dry. I love that flavor, whatever.
Yeah.
To take the beans out and cook them up. You can't buy that.
No, you
anywhere
can't
for
buy that
salads.
because there's little salt.
Yeah.
So if a bean isn't totally ripe, you can still use it. And if it's late in the season and they're not going to dry on the vine, you can eat those beans. Another bean I like to grow beside the bush bean, you know, the green or the yellow, and you can get a lot of beans from those, are the pole beans. But one of my favorite beans is the scarlet runner. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful beans and they're tasty. But again, if you grow those and it's too late in the season and they're not dry, they don't dry on the vine, you can eat them soft. That's the way you like them.
And fava beans, I was living in the Adirondacks at the time, they would never have matured the whole way, but you can grow them and they're so dense, they're very productive. So
Yeah.
you will get a lot of shell bean from fava and they have a good flavor.
And I also grow dried beans, you know, like cranberry and all these. And then I put them in paper bags after they've dried, and I sit in front of the wood stove and it gives me something to do, you know. That's one of my favorite things, is sitting in front of the wood stove, whether I have the beans or not. In fact, I had the stove on today. It was pretty chilly out. And one thing I learned about, you know, a lot of people complain about, well, you're burning and you're sending up carbon dioxide, but if you burn fossil fuels, it really gets sucked up into the atmosphere. Whereas wood smoke, if you live in an area where there's a lot of trees, they'll take up a lot of that CO2 right there. So you're not polluting the same way that you pollute with fossil fuels. Next, Nadine. Thank you. Now this is, how many people grow the sprouts? Do you have any tricks for us?
No, but I've, some years I do really well with them, and I have too many, and other years, like 2 years ago, I hardly had any, they just didn't form.
It depends. It really does.
It's true. So that's what happened.
So
Well,
2
they're
years,
happy.
last year they did
They
okay.
did okay, year
That's right.
before, no.
Year before, no.
No,
Right.
That's right.
you had an experience too?
Yeah, it was
With the
terrible.
weather?
I don't know, I just thought that was me.
No, it's the weather, it's the moisture, and, you know, in September they'll be like this.
Yeah,
And then, as it gets colder, they'll get larger.
they're much more delicious after the frost.
Oh yeah, they sweeten up. In fact, the two plants that seem to like each other in my garden, when it's cold, are the the kale.
Kale.
The chard has sort of gone past, but the Brussels sprouts.
Mhm.
But to me, the real question isn't growing them, it's how you prepare them.
There's some really good recipes, olive oil, garlic.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're wonderful grilled, they're wonderful in the oven, broiled.
Yeah.
They're great with olive oil and garlic
And you know, if you grow them, like I was trying to use as much as I could of everything, the leaves and all the pieces, unlike like broccoli doesn't taste that, you know, it's okay.
Yeah, you can eat-
But, oh my gosh, the leaves of the Brussels sprouts and all its little stems, they taste so wonderful.
and if you take some of the leaves off,
Yeah.
they'll sprout a little bit earlier.
Oh,
They'll get a
will they?
little
If
larger.
you pull off the leaves on the outside,
Yeah,
forming.
and then so when you pull them off, you can eat the leaves.
And they taste really good if you peel them. I saw a recipe on that. That was fun, but You know, I'm not sure how many times I would do that, where you pull all the leaves off, you know. and
You pull them all
saute
off?
it. Yeah, after it's
Just
ripe,
separate it.
after it's ripe, you know, and just
Oh.
pull all the separate leaves off and saute it.
Yeah.
It tastes great, but it's like, wow, it was a lot of work. It was a fun experiment.
Yeah. Well, I pull them off and then, they'll last, into November.
If you just peel them off like that while you're,
Oh, yeah. And I had a good year, but every year is different. And you're right, the previous year they didn't do that well.
Okay,
So it's not you.
okay, good.
Every year you have different cultural conditions. A few years ago, we had the late blight. That really hit us hard. I didn't get it as bad as some people. I was still able to can maybe half the tomatoes. And I use equisetum horsetail tea. And I
interesting.
put it in a big pot, bring it to boil it. It said, it's got more silica than any other plant. And I sprayed it and that sort of helped. I never got a full blight. That really made a difference.
Interesting.
And horsetail grows everywhere. You know what it is? So, it's one of my favorite plants. Next, please. Now, about every 2 weeks, I go up to Hardwick. Now, Hardwick is considered the center of the universe, right? So I don't go up there for that reason. But I do go up there and I teach gardening to young interns, and I work with disabled folks, and the place is called Heartbeat Life Sharing. If y'all ever want to do a great video, it's a great place to go. And they have about 60 people that live there, about 25 disabled folks. And these are 3 of the gentlemen I work with. You can see we were digging carrots. Now, there was only one problem. Actually, it wasn't a problem. When I would take my dog, Autumn Girl, up there, I'd be out there with Autumn and she'd be chewing on the carrots, like the voles like to chew, you know. And the next moment, nobody would be around. The young men would be taking her for a walk. I didn't really care. They were great to work with. I always enjoyed going up there. And I go up there every 2 weeks. I've been doing it for 7 or 8 years. They have dairy cows, they have chickens, pigs, horses. In fact, one man from Jasper Hill that makes that cheese up there in Greensboro has moved to Heartbeat, and now they're making cheese there. So it's a wonderful place to visit, and it's called Heartbeat, and it's on Old Farm Road, I think off of 16, I'm not sure. Okay. Well, let's see. We have, I was trying to see what page that was on. 108. I was just I've read some from the journal. Now I wanted to read a little bit from the section where I write specifically A to Z about vegetables. So here's a little bit about cucumbers. Once the cucumbers begin to flower, I flip open the row covers, you know what row covers, placing them all the way over to one side of the metal hoops. This allows the bees to do their job. Actually, I wanted to go back. Oh, here's what I wanted to read. Sorry. How can I imitate sex in order to help out the reproduction cycle of cukes and squash? Just take a Q-tip and place it in the yellow male flower. There's no fruit on the male. And rub it around a little. The pollen will attach to the Q-tip. Then you take the Q-tip and place it on the female part of the flower, which does have the fruit on it. This will complete the reproduction process, even though the bees generally do just a fine job. After all, they've been pollinating cucumbers for quite a long time. Cucumber seeds have been carbon dated back to 12,000 years ago. so they've been around. That's a cute picture. Next, please. This friend of mine, another friend, she was the one that had the guitar player right in the beginning. And she's a lovely artist, and she said, I'd like to put a painting of peppers in there, so she did, Nora. And by the way, I heard the other day, and I think it works, that if you go to an Indian store and you buy a bag of hot red pepper, it'll get rid of the woodchucks. I mean, they'll take off if they're underneath your porch or. Hmm?
Hot red pepper. You
Hot.
sprinkle it around like if
Yeah,
you've
you
got
spring it around.
30 holes.
Yeah,
You do?
yeah, and it works.
They're just gonna relocate somewhere else.
That's right, they will. They will. They may go to your neighbors. The other thing is they'll deter voles. You know how in the fall the voles will get into your beets and carrots, and they'll deter them as well. I mean, they'll move them on. So
So it's in powder form? It's a
powder, it's a hot red powder, and it's cheap. I mean, there's an Indian store in Burlington on Williston Road. There must be an Indian store down there.
Oh, anybody know of anything around here?
Yeah, in West Platte.
Oh, where about
Was that Caucasian?
No,
How heavy do you apply
I
it?
can't think of the name of it.
Just sprinkle it, not that heavy.
Does it rain like?
Yeah, well, that's the thing
You have to keep it
with
active.
any of those things. We used to get blood meal from the extension agent years ago,
Yeah.
and you'd put it around the garden to deter the deer, and it would rain. But one thing I have, yeah, it does. But you can also, two things that I found that help is the fishing line, the clear fishing line.
Yes.
They come up against it. And the other thing you can do is take these garlic clips.
Yeah, they're good.
They're good, aren't they?
They're fragrant all year. and
Yeah.
All summer.
I find they last a couple of years.
Yeah.
You get a bag of what, 20, 30 in a
About
bag?
20,
They're not that expensive.
And
but
you
it's-
clip on.
They're clip-on, they have little clip-ons. So if they like get into your beans, or you just clip them onto the, however you're holding up the peas. Did you have a question?
Yes, I was gonna say, you put them on a rope or?
No.
Anything,
Just
twine.
clip them right on the plant.
I put them right on the plant, but
Yeah.
when I grow the peas and the beans, I can also put them on the cages or whatever.
Now, I've got a question for you. Crows,
Yeah,
corn,
yeah.
what do you use for, I gather if you cover them for, until they're up at a certain point and the kernel's gone, they're not gonna go after the kernel. But they have really come and wreaked havoc with our garden.
Can't get crow tar anymore, really.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want crotar, but I want a cover, so what do you suggest for a cover for that period of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks?
I think you could use it, I don't have an answer, but what I would suggest, they have the row covers, and you can get very light material, or you can get the heavy material. I would get the lightest you can get.
Yeah,
I used to have trouble with crows when I was growing commercially.
oh boy, once they find you.
Oh, yeah.
Once they are
Crows out there.
awful.
That's why we don't have
So in little hoops, where do you get your hoops?
Maybe that's why we don't have-
Oh, I've had, I don't know, I got them in different places.
Just make them too.
You can make, I made them when I was a commercial grower, but you can get them at most garden supply stores. I'm sure Agway or other people have them, but they have different weights of row covers. And I would get the lightest weight that you can find. I don't think you could use bird netting though.
No.
That wouldn't work, no. But the light row cover would allow a lot of the light to come through. Okay, next one, please. How many grow sweet potatoes? Your daughter does. Does she grow, she grows a lot, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
I'm the cook. She's the
Huh?
She's the gardener, I'm the cook.
You're the cook. Does she make her own slips? Or did she purchase
I think she purchased.
it? Yeah. I've been growing them now for 3 years. And I also, because slips are pretty expensive. So I just take a potato, stick it in a jar, put a pencil through it, half of it's in water, and eventually it'll sprout. And then I cut the individual, I cut it down and put the roots in some germination mix, and I can get from one sweet potato. You look perplexed.
Oh, no.
You're not? That's the way you look? Okay. I can get from one sweet potato 10 slips. And I'm sure in a greenhouse they get more.
But they can't you just can't buy one from the store and try to do
No.
that. You have to, get organic water. I mean,
Yeah.
she's done that.
Yeah.
So what's your germination mix?
Oh, it's just the standard peat, vermiculite, and
Oh,
perlite.
Okay.
Just a very light mix, which is what I use to start plants, and then I mix in compost, when I'm transplanting them. But they're wonderful, they're delicious, they're easy to grow, and you could probably grow them around here.
I have a question, the new horticultural variety they're using in ornamentals, do you know if you can eat those? I saved the tubers and then I never ate them. They have
Say that again?
They have a Ipomoea sweet potato vine but it's a ornamental plant for
Oh,
landscaping. And I
Well-
know down south, they grow huge patches of them under the trees, they grow all year round. So
I think
couldn't
that like
figure out
any
if
other
you
plant,
could
it's
eat
an
them or not.
ornamental. It's bred to be an ornamental and
Yeah.
flower, it's not bred, for that reason. Here's a trick, and you can use this with lots of plants. If you get a sweet potato slip, and you have a bunch of tires hanging around, you grow it in the tire, and as it grows up, you keep putting the. Have you done that?
I've seen it.
You've seen it done.
With potatoes.
Yeah. Actually, I knew a guy in New Hampshire, he had a junkyard, and he'd throw a bunch of manure in the cars, the windows were open. And he started all of his pumpkins. And the vines would be growing out. I'm sure he could have done the same thing with sweet potatoes. Anyway, try them if you haven't tried, it's worth trying. Have you tried them? I don't know, I can't tell. Next. Okay. Let's see where we are. I have I'm gonna tell you here's a question for you before we talk about tomatoes. What is small, red, and whispers? A horseradish.
Oh.
Okay. Here's some lines taken from a Guy Clark country and western song called Homegrown Tomatoes, 1983. Only two things in life that money can't buy. That's true love and a homegrown tomato. And that's true. I love to raise tomatoes. Next.
Wow.
You got some of those? Yeah.
That's so.
I love this shot. As soon as I saw this, I wanted. What else can you say? I mean, there's nothing more you can say. Next, please. Blueberries. Wow. They look good. I have friends that live up in Lubec, Maine, right across from New Brunswick. You ever been up there?
Yeah.
Been to Campobello or Roosevelt?
I didn't go across.
You didn't go
Bridge.
across? It's a great place. And once you get above Machias, then you're in Maine. But I have a blueberry rake, wild one, and I could go up there and, because you have mile and mile of wild blueberries. It's a great place to go up and get wild blueberries. They're delicious. Just wanted to read from the book on blueberries. 66. If I had to take a bucket of berries on a spaceship to the moon, I would choose the tasty, delicious blueberry. Of all the soft fruits, blueberries are my favorite among the native berries of North America. Strawberries come in second. It's estimated that blueberries burst on the scene some 13,000 years ago. They're indigenous to North America and have deep roots in our country's history. The Native Americans held blueberries in very high esteem. Tribal elders recounted how the Great Spirit sent starberries, in quotes, to ease the children's hunger during famine. They called them starberries because the blossom end of each berry, the calyx, forms a perfect five-pointed star. So they're very special, and it wasn't such a great maple year. I heard it was sweeter, but it wasn't. They just didn't last. Anybody here tap?
It was
It's crazy.
from 10% production to 75-80%. Some people said they had a normal year, so.
Really?
It depends. It depends.
It
Where you
depends.
were. It depends, it all depends.
If you were up high or if you were low, or
I don't, there's no rhyme or reason really.
yeah,
People,
But it was 3 weeks late starting.
that's right.
Very late.
Um, okay, next, please. Now, the question is, what are these?
Strawberry.
Wild cranberries.
Another trick question.
Rose hips.
No, they look like rose hips. Before I tell you the answer, this woman right here her name is Margaret Daniel. She lives in Bethel, not far from here. In my first book, The Woodchuck's Guide, I call her the Good Witch on the Hill. And she is always out with baskets and collecting herbs and making potions. So that's Margaret, that's her daughter Madeline. And they're going through barberries. It's hard to believe. I think they're the Japanese barberry. They're hard to process, but she makes juice. And they're very high in vitamin C and antioxidants and everything else. But that's what they're doing. You can see some of the herbs up here.
What does the plant look like? I have no idea what they.
What a barberry?
Yeah, I don't know what a barberry is.
They're out, you'll see them a lot in farmers' fields. They're like a weed shrub. And you really want to get them out of your fields because they'll take over.
They're invasive.
Hmm?
They're invasive.
They're invasive. I don't know if this is the American barberry or the Japanese. But she has a hedgerow of them. And they just go along. She also picks lots of other berries. And then she makes juice and freezes it and drinks it in the winter. She also taps white birch, takes the sap and freezes that. So she's up on Christian Hill, Margaret Daniel. Wonderful. Old friend, known her many years. Nick. Anybody know what these are? They're being planted on the steps of the Capitol steps.
Not currants.
No, they're not currants. Called sea berries. And they're coming into vogue. They're easy to pick, but they're hard to process. But they make a wonderful landscape plant. You just have to make sure they have plenty of room.
They're not poisonous, are they?
No, no. I just have lots of trick questions. I have a couple more. Next.
It's stimulating.
Yeah, I don't know what they're picking, but I like the picture. And I don't think they live around here. But we know what she's picking.
Strawberries.
I went into Hannaford's the other day and they had these strawberries, huge ones.
Cotton ball ones, tastes like cotton, they don't have any flavor.
They have no flavor.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to kill them. Or just cut them, slice them, put a lot of sugar on them and pretend.
They're horrible.
They're horrible. I mean, I think they've gotten worse.
Yes.
They're big,
They look good.
they look nice, but to me, a smaller berry, a dark
More flavor.
red, you know, nothing like it. Next. There's your man.
Oh, you got the apple seed?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But what was his favorite thing? I mean, what did he really do besides spread the seeds and the,
The Appalachian Gap, you know, trail.
no, hard cider. That
Oh.
was,
Close together.
I'm surprised that,
Well,
huh?
hard cider's coming into its own. They're
I know.
They're bottling it now.
I'm surprised they don't have a Johnny Appleseed hard cider. They got everything else. I mean, I used to make it in the barrel, and it was sweet, and then it was tart, and then it was vinegar, you know.
It was wine.
Hmm?
Then it was wine, huh?
Yeah, well, no, it was,
More like champagne. if you
Yeah.
do it right.
yeah. Next. The same woman that did the front cover, Michelle Beckstrom, who did this, also did this painting. She lived in Hyde Park with her family for a number of years and they moved to Maine. But she did a beautiful job on this cover. I guess I'm like the rock star who's trying to sell their CDs. Oh, I didn't mention my second book. That's called Lifting the Yoke, and that's on Local Farm and Food Solutions. That's my political, social, economic side. So that was my second book. Just, you know, in case anyone, you know.
And we have them all in the library in case you'd like to borrow them.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I was gonna say that. Here we go. Okay, next. Here's Nick Coles of Shelburne Orchards. A lot of pick your own, and he makes the donuts and the pies and, you know. I think he's making a brandy now too. I heard that up in Maine, just read it the other day, that where the snow was really hard and crusted, the deer were going up in the orchards and eating the buds. I don't know if that's happening here. I haven't heard anything. Next. Okay, here's, what'd you say? I thought you said it. Yeah. I'm actually trying to grow them.
What is it?
Down in the Intervale. And every year the the trees get bigger. And last year there was just, so, have you ever tasted them?
No.
What is it?
It's like a banana melon. It's good. They're huge.
What do you call it?
Pawpaws. They grow them down southern New York and Pennsylvania. And they say they can grow them here, but I haven't seen them. Okay, would you read another one? No. This is one that I wrote, called Blackberry Summer. Speaking of berries. She's very nice.
Long hot days of summer, rain the day before, walked amidst overgrown fields where homesteads once stood, no more. Over railroad tracks abandoned in time, down an overgrown path hidden away, The earth was poor and dusty wild, explored no longer as a child. I found a place where berries abound, ne'er a person near, nor much a sound. My metal bucket swinging in the air, scooted around barberries and thickets not so fair. I need not approach the home garden gate, 'tis time to taste that wild blackberry sweet, move through briars to meet my fate. Though thorns were there for me to greet, such dark purple fruits were lovingly found, branches heavy laden touching the ground. The metal bucket is full, time to go home. Walk through the grass and the wild roses, the jewels of summer sparkle in the sun. The juice of berries runs down my chin, the past has just begun.
Thank you. Okay, to conclude, I just want to read, can we go back one? This is the conclusion. I'll just read the first paragraph, and it's called, "These boots are made for gardening." I don't know whether Nancy Sinatra will sue me. Let's keep this short and sweet, like a freshly dug carrot in October. I was in the garden the other day along with my dog, Autumn Girl, as she laid in the grass and watched me putter about with those warm brown eyes. All of a sudden, 3 aliens from Mars flew down to observe my activities. They intimated by way of nonverbal communication that gardening seemed to be quite enjoyable to the Earthlings, and I responded by saying that it was in fact America's favorite hobby. The Chuckster actually agreed with me for once. So thank you very much.
Yeah.